Hi everyone, I'm Chuck McLennan for Buick Know-How. In this program, we're going to cover a variety of topics, all of which relate to drivability issues. It's a full program, so let's get started. Here's a look at some information related to engine misfire. I want to cover some possible misconceptions concerning misfire and the KH-202 feature that allows you to access the misfire history of individual cylinders. Let's say a car arrives with a complaint of stumble under load. You check the trouble codes and there's nothing related to misfire. Does this mean there's no misfire occurring? Not necessarily. It's important to understand that even with OBD2, it's still possible to encounter pretty substantial misfire without setting a misfire code. By design, the PCM only triggers a misfire code when the misfire reaches the criteria established by OBD2. So, what are these criteria? Well, there are two circumstances in which the PCM will set a misfire trouble code. One instance in which the PCM will set a misfire trouble code is when the vehicle exceeds the OBD2 criteria for what's known as a catalyst damaging misfire. This is how the PCM identifies a catalyst damaging misfire. Every 200 engine revolutions, the PCM conducts a test. The PCM counts the number of misses that occur during the 200 revolution test period. If the PCM calculates that a given 200 revolution test sample registers enough misfires to potentially damage the catalyst, the PCM will fail the test sample. As soon as a test sample fails with a potential catalyst damaging misfire, the PCM will set a misfire code, start flashing the malfunction indicator lamp, and begin logging individual cylinder misfire history on vehicles equipped with that feature. If during the next 3 ignition cycles the problem does not reoccur, the light will go out, but the PCM will retain misfire history. Another instance in which the PCM will set a misfire trouble code is when the vehicle exceeds the OBD2 criteria for excessive emissions due to a misfire condition. Here's how the PCM identifies such a misfire. Every 200 engine revolutions, the PCM conducts a test. During the test, the PCM counts the number of times the engine misses. If the PCM calculates that a test sample registers enough misfires to create emission levels 1 1/2 times greater than the federal emission standards, the PCM will fail that 200 revolution block. Understand that this failure is not as substantial as the catalyst damaging misfire explained earlier and will not set a diagnostic trouble code or turn on the malfunction indicator lamp. What the failed test does is make the PCM aware of a potential problem. As the engine continues to run, the PCM will continue evaluating each 200 revolution test block. Once a total of 16 blocks accumulate, the PCM will count the total number of failed blocks. If 5 or more blocks fail, the PCM will set a misfire code and begin logging individual cylinder misfire history on vehicles equipped with that feature. The PCM will not turn on the malfunction indicator lamp until the vehicle has failed this test during a second trip. Once a misfire code sets, the PCM begins accumulating a log of every miss that occurs with every cylinder. The best diagnostic course is to first address the cylinder with the most history of misfires. It's probably the cylinder that set the code in the first place. If the cylinders all have about the same number of misses, then look for a condition that would affect all of the cylinders. When looking at a cylinder misfire history, be aware that it's possible for a misfire in one cylinder to log a false misfire reading in another cylinder. This is particularly true of cylinders that share the same crankshaft journal and cylinders that follow one another in the firing order. The KH-202 features a new screen that graphically depicts engine misfire history. The bar graph is organized based on engine firing order. Because the graph reports in firing order, it can be a helpful tool when trying to understand how a misfire in one cylinder can potentially influence neighboring cylinders in the firing order. As a rule, the cylinder with the longest bar graph is the cylinder that requires attention. Sometimes a drivability symptom might suggest a fuel trim problem. When that's the case, you might not find a trouble code related to fuel trim. Here's why. According to federal OBD2 requirements, a diagnostic trouble code must set when fuel trim malfunctions cause the vehicle to produce 1 1/2 times the federal emission standard. Occasionally, you might service a vehicle that has a noticeable drivability problem, fuel trim readings that are not acceptable, yet there is no code set. To understand how all this can occur, we need to understand more about what are known as fuel trim cells. Fuel trim cells are used by the PCM to anticipate the fuel trim needs found at different load and RPM conditions. There are typically a total of 16 fuel trim cells arranged based on engine load and engine RPM. Cell number 0 typically represents an engine at idle. Cell 15 represents an engine at maximum load and maximum speed. As an engine operates, the PCM will adjust fuel trim based on the learned values for each cell. As far as OBD2 is concerned, cells 4, 5, and 9 are the only ones that matter. They represent the driving conditions the federal emissions people are most concerned with. A trouble code sets when the actual fuel trim is not close to the learned values expected of these 3 cells. On top of that, the values in cell 5 carry 67% of the importance, cell 9, 22% of the importance, and cell 4, 11% of the importance. If we attempt to convert cells 4, 5, and 9 into driving conditions, we get an approximate range of speeds anywhere from about 25 to 45 miles per hour, and load ranges from about half throttle to light cruising throttle. This will vary somewhat from vehicle to vehicle. The point of all this is that not all fuel trim related drivability problems are going to set a code. Remember, even though a fuel trim code is not set, it's worth your while to consider fuel trim as a possible cause of the drivability condition. As you probably know, a heated oxygen sensor is now used behind the catalytic converter. You may think you know exactly how it behaves, but I think I might be able to tell you something new. Let me first set the groundwork by reviewing a few basics. When the air-fuel mixture burns rich, the exhaust stream is starved for oxygen. When the mixture burns lean, the exhaust stream is flooded with oxygen. With that principle in mind, think of the number 1 heated oxygen sensor. Under normal conditions, the sensor is constantly toggling between rich and lean, as it's always chasing the perfect air-fuel mixture. Every time the number 1 oxygen sensor switches back and forth from rich to lean, the exhaust stream alternates from having a little oxygen to having a lot of oxygen. This inconsistent oxygen flow does not allow the converter to operate at its best. To function best, the catalytic converter likes a steady dose of oxygen. To help keep the converter functioning at peak efficiency, it is loaded with a material called cerium. Cerium compensates for oxygen peaks and valleys by absorbing oxygen when it can and releasing oxygen when it must. The end result is a relatively steady supply of oxygen in the exhaust stream to keep the converter operating at maximum efficiency. If you've been through training related to the post-converter oxygen sensor, you know that readings from this sensor should flatline toward the lean end of the scale, typically at or below 300 millivolts. While this is true, you may not have been told that it is normal for this sensor to occasionally swing above the 650 mark, hold for a while, and then settle again below 300 millivolts. These voltage swings detected by the second heated oxygen sensor are the result of oxygen changes brought on by the cerium loaded in the converter. It's important to understand that these slow and infrequent voltage changes are normal and do not indicate a deteriorating converter. If readings from the second heated oxygen sensor begin to look like the frequent swings of the first heated oxygen sensor, then you can feel confident the catalyst is not doing its job. Recently, a situation came up in the field that you might be interested in hearing about. Here's the scenario. A vehicle exhibits a drivability problem caused by a serious rich condition. The problem could be caused by an injector that's stuck open, a torn fuel pressure regulator diaphragm, or any of the other rich conditions listed in the know-how reference manual. I'll say the problem is caused by a stuck open injector. The injector is replaced, the car runs correctly, and is released to the customer. Shortly thereafter, the car returns to the dealership with a flashing malfunction indicator lamp and either diagnostic trouble code P0420 or P0430, a catalyst problem. If the catalyst was damaged during the initial problem, why was the code not set at that time? During a serious misfire event, many trouble codes are suspended due to unreliable engine information. One of these suspended diagnostics is the catalyst monitor function. With suspended diagnostic functions, the system can't evaluate the converter until the misfire is repaired. Once the repair is complete, the self-diagnostic function may have to run as many as 20 tests before actually failing the converter, and this takes time. Let me show you a way of speeding up the converter diagnostic process. Disconnect the negative battery cable for 5 minutes. This will force the PCM into a quick learn mode, which runs multiple tests within a single drive cycle. When the battery is reconnected, use the Tech2 to verify that all IM flags are set to no. The IM flags are located under System Information. With the wheels blocked and the vehicle in neutral, run the engine up to 2,500 RPM and hold it there for 3 minutes. When 3 minutes are up, bring it back to idle, but don't shut it off. Grab either a service manual or this edition of the know-how reference manual and find the conditions required to set the converter failure trouble code. This would be section 3 of the reference manual, listed under trouble code P0420 or P0430. Take the car out for a road test and stay within the driving conditions listed. While driving, use the Tech2 to monitor the catalyst monitor flag. It should start out as no, and after about 2 minutes of driving, switch to yes. When it switches to yes, the system is done testing the converter. If the diagnostic run failed, the malfunction indicator lamp will illuminate and DTC P0420 or P0430 will set. The resetting of either code indicates which converter requires replacement. If no MIL illuminates after the flag switches to yes, then the vehicle is ready to return to the customer. I'd like to review a test that many of you should be familiar with. It's a test that can help diagnose drivability problems that frequently are not accompanied by a hard code. It's a test that every drivability technician should know, and it's called the fuel pressure test.